if they didn't pull somebody over for expired tabs on their car, and then decide to search their vehicle, maybe this violent situation would not have happened.
One person's interpretation of the police may seem unfair and unbalanced to you, and but in their world, that's the way it is.
And rather than togetherness, like, okay, well, we should see past our minor differences and look at the things that we share in common. No, we have these things that are different. Let's fight.
We don't put like robes on and sacrifice goats at night and like get together and talk about how we're going to like be terrible people to women. In a world where there is no kitchen sink microscopy, what do you do? I'm Casey Rochford. And we would love it if you would like and share this video and subscribe to the channel and see more corny shit that I do. And my friend here.
In a world. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and don't forget, we write our own music, and stick around to the end of the episode, and you'll hear something new. And if you really like it and want to help support the show, go to patreon.com/KSMvidcast and give us a little bit of monetary love. We'd really, that would help. So what should we talk about today, Casey?
Well, there's it's going to sound convoluted, but I think it's all going to coalesce into something really cool like it usually does. But there's this phenomenon that, somebody will say something disparaging about a certain group. They'll say, hey, all white men, you need to stop being assholes to women or something. Or, somebody will say, cops they just have it out for black people. And then invariably somebody on either side of those coins is going to be like, well, not all men, or, not all cops are bad, and there's merit to that, but there's also problems in that. And I thought it would be good to talk about like the situations that kind of dictate when it's kind of okay to lump people together and when it's not.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty interesting philosophical topic. Because it isn't black and white. Like I definitely think there's quite a lot going on underneath that, and I don't think you can tip things to one side or the other and really be faithful to reality, I guess, for lack of a better term.
So, I mean, the short answer is I think it boils down to your experiences and statistical reasoning, on risk taking effectively.
Yeah, I agree.
So what you run into is like this statistical reasoning concept of type 1 errors and type 2 errors. And effectively that's like a type 1 error is where you end up with a false positive, and type 2 is you end up with a false negative. Mm-hmm. So if you kind of apply that to these situations, let's say the not all men thing. So there's somebody who is, lashing out at cis white males for X thing, whatever. And then somebody comes along and they're like, hey, I'm a nice guy or whatnot. Well, it's like that particular person probably had an experience or many experiences actually that led to this decision making in which type of error you want to risk taking. You want to take the false positive and put your trust in somebody and then get screwed over? Or do you take the risk with the false negative and possibly just ostracize and piss people off because you're a little standoffish? It's like neither one's a winner, but uh,
Yeah.
you tend to go with the one where you're most likely to survive, and obviously that applies to people with their disdain towards police. It really depends on experience.
Sure, it does. And I would say, I guess in those kinds of situations, wow, that kind of like opened up a whole bunch of different things that hopefully I can remember all these points that I was thinking of. But uh, okay, I just forgot one. But why can't there be a kind of a middle ground where, maybe it isn't really one thing or the other, that maybe the it, if you're looking at like cubes and spheres or something like that, it's a pretty clear cut kind of thing. But when we're talking about people and personalities and different situations and a lot of nuance going on, um, I don't know that you really have to make a decision or come to a specific conclusion about a particular group. Like, I to me, I'm a like fuzzy logic kind of person. I'm like, well, why can't you just take it in the moment? Look at each situation individually and adjust a little bit at a time, um, and not necessarily flop to one side or the other because of a few bad or good experiences. I think that diminishes the totality of the circumstance, I guess.
Yeah.
But humans do that. That's what we do. We put things in boxes, and
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to make a similar point to that, in that um, the way I described it almost makes it sound like, well, it's always safer to make the type 2 error and potentially think someone's bad and avoid that situation. Well, that's like out in the world, that's out in like an unsafe territory, let's say.
yeah,
Like, there's nothing's guaranteed, no safety is guaranteed. But if you flip the situation into a safe space, and I'm gonna take a courtroom as an example. If you make a type 2 error, you have just let a criminal go. But if you make a type 1 error, you just put an innocent person in jail.
yeah,
So it's like
yeah.
there's risks associated with each type of error depending on the situation you're in, and your experience plays into it, a lot of it too. So it's
Yeah, exactly. And because I think it's a perception kind of thing. Like, people's personal experiences kind of form their view of what the world is and categorize things the way that we like to categorize things. And so, depending on where you are in the world or your socioeconomic status or chains of events that led up to your life experience, you're going to have different experiences in different situations. Like, if you live in a really uh, dense urban population full of people that are kind of not really well to do socioeconomically, and there's a lot of crime and stuff, your perception of the police is going to be different than if you live in a wealthy neighborhood where there isn't that much crime. Um,
and vice versa, because this the crime statistics are going to drive the perceptions of the police, and they're making the same decisions based on preserving their lives or the lives of others, and
sure.
which risks they have to put on a scale. I mean, that said, it, there should be a little more scrutiny, because they're the ones that typically have the upper hand. But
Well, yeah, exactly. They kind of have the um, uh, a monopoly on the initiation of force, and they
yeah,
carry guns.
yeah, I mean, like, let's be honest, their job can be dangerous, but more often than not, they're the ones leveling the gun before anything happens. And the only, I don't know this, like, I don't have a statistic or anything, but I would venture to say that most of the time when a police officer is injured or like shot in the line of duty, it's because the guns were already drawn when they pulled up, or they were taken by surprise. you
Yeah,
know
and well, okay, like in there, because this topic is much bigger than just the police. But let's talk about the police for a minute. Um, you know, I would say that in the vast majority of cases with police, again, like you, I don't have the numbers on this, but I think just you can kind of reason your way through this, that the encounters that police have with the public are not involuntary. They're not like walking down the street and somebody jumps out of the bushes and now they have to respond. I mean, maybe there are definitely situations where someone's running around and threatening people and they come in and respond. But in general, they're the ones that initiate the situation. So, yeah,
yeah
not that violence is ever really justified, but if they didn't pull somebody over for expired tabs on their car, and then decide to search their vehicle, maybe this violent situation would not have happened. Um,
yeah that's a fair point. Everyone's always like, well, if you had just done what the cop said, you
hmm,
wouldn't have got shot. But it's like, well, if the cop wasn't sticking their nose where they didn't really need to, maybe they wouldn't have ended up shooting somebody.
yeah, yeah,
And it's,
exactly.
and it's like, either way, the civilian is always the bad guy. It's like, oh, you got shot, huh? Well, sucks to be you, because all cops are awesome, and I put a blue stripe on my American flag and violate the U.S. flag code and blah blah blah. Anyway,
Now, violating the U.S. flag code is not criminal. Of course,
no,
it's kind of a recommendation, but yeah, that's true.
no, it's more of a
Yeah,
hypocritical thing, but
yeah, and I would say that being too supportive or too dismissive of police is a bad thing. Like, I think they're people like anybody else, and they're just in a situation, and that's how it is. Um, but
yeah,
the thing is, I think with these kinds of situations, and I would say it varies depending on whatever it is you're talking about. In the case of police, it would vary depending on like whether it was just like a traffic stop where they gave you a ticket, or whether they just executed somebody on the side of the road. The execution is obviously a big deal, and we should be scrutinizing it, and they should be held to a very high standard at that point. Um, but a lot of these kinds of things are a very small proportion of this group. So it kind of from people looking at it, it looks like it's all over the place. It's prevalent. The news is they sensationalize everything. So they're like, oh my God, there was this execution of somebody on the side of the road, and it was race driven or something, or whatever's going to hype people up. And
yeah,
when you only see those things, you tend to interpret the whole as being comprised of only those things. The news doesn't talk about, oh, hey, a cop came over to somebody's house and helped an old lady get a cat out of her tree. They don't, you don't see those kinds of things on a daily basis. So all you
no,
hear
of
is the
course.
bad stuff.
Right. Well, and that's understandable. I mean, the media has to produce, you know, interesting material for people to watch, just as any other um, show does. But
Sure.
the point I want to make here is that, obviously, writ large, like, everything that goes on between the police and the community is a majority peaceful and totally, like, above the belt interaction.
Yeah.
That's not what the point is, though, because you know it's like you're more likely to be struck by lightning than bit by a shark. Really depends on the fact that, like, who's in the water that often. Like,
Yeah.
if your job is as a scuba diver, your chances of getting bit by a shark go way up, and that's because of circumstance.
That's true. Yeah.
So uh, the way that translates here is like if you are living in, you know, downtown Seattle, like Third and Bell or something, where it's all cruddy and
Ooh.
there's constant crime and stuff, and you know you've got, you know, police with their feckles up or their hackles up, feckles, heckles, hackles, schmackles. Anyway, you got these cops on edge, and you've got people milling about that could be good and could be bad, and you know there's just different situations that lead to um, people having different interactions, and I think that's totally valid. And one person's interpretation of the police may seem unfair and unbalanced to you, and but you know in their world that's the way it is, you know, and you just don't see it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I mean, wow, it's a lot to absorb there.
Yeah.
Um, no,
Well,
that's
I guess we
a good
should
point.
maybe talk about like the devil's advocate to that, though, in that there's like a, you know, kind of a negative aspect to creating these false negatives, you know, like assuming the worst out of people. Like, how does that make those people feel? How does it make people around it witnessing it? How does it make them feel about that person casting that judgment, you know?
Well, and I would argue that the that kind of assumption, this kind of like us versus them sort of system that exists, actually perpetuates a lot of the problems that existed before and might amplify them. You know, if the cops and the populace don't see themselves as one and the same, just doing different jobs, but instead see themselves as, excuse me, um, one tier and another tier duking it out,
Mhm.
um, that that can only lead to conflict, and I think that does do us a disservice. It does everybody a disservice, really.
Yeah. Like, so I mean, I'm critical of the police, like I hold them to a high standard, but I by no means am I like all cops suck. You know, I'm not like that. And
Yeah.
that actually like rubs me the wrong way when I hear people say that. Like I have a few friends that are like that, but I have even more friends that are just like me. They're just critical of the police. They're like, "Hey, come on, step your game up. You know, you're not a good cop if you watch this happen and do nothing." You know, like there's high standards that they have to be held to, but it's not automatically assuming they're bad people.
Well,
And when I hear people do that, I'm like, oh, come on, you're hurting the cause here.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think there's it could be a lot of harm in overgeneralization.
Hmm.
Well, not could be. There definitely is.
Yeah,
It
you got to
because
see
it
the nuance.
yeah, it's simplifying something that's actually quite complex. And you know that's okay if you're creating art or something like that. But you know, when you're dealing with the real world and situations where risk is involved and danger is involved and stuff, yeah, that can lead to some bad things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, to go back to like the gender thing, you know, like not all men and stuff like that. It's that's another tricky one because uh the way I see it, when you just like throw a big blanket out there that's like not just men but like cis straight white men, you know, like
Yeah. Whatever your label is, yeah.
you pick it's still a large group, but you pick like a very particular one and you just attack, you know. Like it's not like, hey asshole men, or you know, like hey rapists or whatever, you know, stop it. It's like this big huge group of people, and it's like, hey, you're all assholes, quit doing this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I do have a problem with that, like ascribing a, I guess what am I trying to say? Like ascribing like micro features to a macro system,
Yeah.
like men or something, or white men or whatever, and saying everybody in that block possesses all of the same minuscule features as one particular group. That's completely ridiculous. Like that,
Yeah.
that's not borne out by science or observation. That's just like assumptions.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not a popular uh, phrase to say, but I mean, it's like the cold hard truth. Uh, you know, uh, ascribing the same feature to all cis white straight male men or whatever, that is racial and sexual profiling, which is
Yeah, it
bigotry.
is. It's actually kind of bigoted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely not okay, and that's creating a divide, or furthering a divide that we really need to like not do that too.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because again, it's this whole like if you divide people, then it kind of um, inserts this kind of us versus them mentality, and rather than togetherness, like, okay, well, we should see past our minor differences and look at the things that we share in common. No, we have these things that are different, let's fight.
Yeah,
And I think that's super harmful to society. If I mean, at least if your goal is to have a society that is functional and pleasant and calm. If you're interested in inciting a bunch of rebellious attitude and conflict and stuff, well, yeah, then that's exactly how you would do it.
yeah.
Just my 2 cents.
So I like the type 1 and type 2 error thing. When I look at the two in context of lumping all men together versus lumping all police together, one glaring difference I see is privilege. And I'm not talking about male privilege or white privilege, because I don't think that what you're born with gives you like privilege. Maybe there's a different word for it, but a privilege is something that you earn, like your
Yeah.
job, like police, who have a lot of power.
Yeah,
And
like a title or something like that that gives you the ability to do something you could not otherwise do if you didn't have that title.
right, it's like an exclusive club. It's not just like everyone who is born with such attribute, you are now a part of this ginormous club. It,
Yeah.
you know, it
Yeah. You
police.
police aren't born. Um,
Yeah, you're
just
not born
saying.
cops. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So the police privilege adds this extra layer to the equation, where it is a little more acceptable, in my opinion, to err on the side of a type 2 error, where you just assume that they're going to do something bad and you approach it with caution.
Sure.
Now,
Well, you're actually what you'd said earlier applies. Like in the wild, in a situation where you're walking down the street in the middle of the night, you have no means of self-defense, and you see a shadow across the way. Like, okay, it's totally legit to assume the worst
mm-hmm,
for the sake of your own safety.
yeah,
Cops aren't UPS drivers delivering packages to people. That's the worst you could ever assume. Well, for the most part, that's about the worst you're going to get with a UPS driver. But cops have guns, and they shoot people on a moderately regular basis. You're actually more likely to be killed by a cop than killed in a mass shooting. So, just something to think about.
or
So,
eaten by a shark.
yeah, exactly. So it's legit to assume, to start from that higher level, like danger, like it's a lot more risky to get pulled over by a cop than to have a UPS driver knocking on your door, because the outcome of the UPS driver is an Amazon package or something like that, probably. But the outcome of a police encounter could be your death or imprisonment.
Yeah.
So I think it's legit to see things through a different lens in that kind of situation. But don't turn it up to 11. Just nudge it a little bit. That's the
Right.
problem. Is people? It's like it's either 0 or all the way to 100, and that's not how the world works.
Yeah.
You know.
You brought something up that's actually a good point I wanted to get to about the wild. This is evolution. This is
Mhm.
built into our biology. Out on the plains, if the grass, the long grass started rustling, you had to assume it was a giant lion and he was hungry. You know,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
it could have been the wind. But if you turn tail and run from the wind, uh, at worst you got a little exercise, and at best you got away from a lion. So it's
Yeah.
and that predator prey interaction has a lot to do with visibility. And so if you think about it, like in the wild, why aren't there very many albino animals?
Hmm.
Can you think of a really good evolutionary reason why there aren't that many? Because it's actually a pretty common occurrence in, genetically speaking.
I'm not really sure. Why don't you illuminate me,
Okay,
oh
yeah.
biologist?
So so imagine you're a zebra, let's say,
Hmm.
um, and then there's this zebra that's born without stripes, and you're all hanging out in the woods or whatever, and at your favorite watering hole, and the ones with the stripes kind of blend in with the trees and stuff a little bit, and this like plain white, basically a horse, is just walking around, like light reflecting off it, just sticks out like a sore thumb. Along comes a lion that catches its eye. That minority, that oddball out, has attracted danger. And if you're a minority in the streets of America, uh, there tends to be a stereotype, um, based on some statistics that make those police kind of more weary of you. It's not necessarily a predator prey situation, but it leads into iffy situations, where things can get heated.
Yeah.
So, from a minority standpoint, it's almost like you're the albino zebra thing. Like you're at a disadvantage automatically.
That's true, and I would say it's not. I want to add that it isn't necessarily like a race or
No,
skin pigmentation sort of thing. Like it's more socioeconomic. If you were driving around in some upscale neighborhood in like a beater car, you're going to get a lot more attention from the cops than if you were driving a BMW.
yeah,
So
and I've had that happen.
yeah. If you're the outlier, that someone that's unfamiliar or different than ever, and you could flip it around. You could say, if I drove a BMW to some sort of Hicksville, I guess, let's say, and everybody's driving old pickup trucks, and I've got this like flashy car, I'm going to be the one more scrutinized
Oh yeah,
because I have something more expensive. So
yeah,
it's just the person that's different that kind of sticks out. I think that gets the attention.
yeah. I mean, it could be any factor that makes you different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the way to bring this back around to the not all men is that men and women fundamentally aren't all that different. If you're just lumping men together versus women, like, I mean, it's kind of 50-50 as far as the whole world goes. There's lots of men, there's lots of women, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
it isn't there isn't quite that predator prey going on where there's something targeting something else. uh,
Yeah. Well, and to say, like you said, 50% of the population, it's a 50-50 kind of thing. And there's absolutely no way that all of one of those uh, halves of the population can possess all of the same characteristics. That's completely ridiculous.
yeah,
That so. especially, I mean, you can look at the numbers. I think that it isn't that big of a deal. Not that. Now, here's the thing: these kinds of things, whatever it might be, if it's rape or something, like it definitely deserves attention.
Oh,
But
sure.
you
Yeah.
shouldn't like turn it around on everybody and say everybody is like this, because again, it creates that divide. This this
Mhm.
sort of conflict between these two sides, which aren't even actually two completely different factions. That it's artificial, and all you're doing is making the situation worse. And
Yeah. I mean, like, it's not to say that you um, shouldn't hear someone out, hear
Mhm.
what their experiences were, absolutely take them at their word, and believe that those things happen. You can understand where they're coming from, but you know, not everyone, especially in the days of social media, where you can see a complete stranger saying this, and right off the bat, you've got a certain kind of like negative vibe from them, and
Yeah,
you don't know anything about them, you don't know their background, and that's your first interaction. Your first impression is the strongest, right? So,
yeah.
uh, when you come out all guns blazing like that, um, yeah, it does actually do a lot of harm, just to society in general. you
Well,
know
it's sort of like, it's kind of like the whole overgeneralization thing is kind of just making assumptions about something based on a couple of variables that don't necessarily connect with the actual state, I guess. Like it's superficial. It's like you perform a cursory analysis of something, superficially examining something. You look at like a couple things and you just say, "Oh, well, that's how it is." That that's bullshit. That isn't. That's
yeah.
that's not scientific, and it actually might do you harm. Now, if you're in a survival situation, you're in the wild, you're walking down the streets at midnight. That's the time where you want to do that, but not when you're sitting, in a warm house at your computer. Um, that's the time where you need to be a little more thoughtful and think and reason your way through things, and realize that things are more nuanced. That I guess it just comes down to this whole, like, the world is not black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, so I do my best to listen to a lot of people's stories about both of these situations, interaction, like black people and their interactions with police, um, women with their interactions with men, and I try to take in as much information as I can, and evaluate the situation, and either like commiserate with them, like, oh yeah, that was terrible, they're bad, like, and also learn from that and see how I can adjust my own behavior. But then,
That's important. Yeah.
yeah, and but then there's things where when I apply all of those logical features to it, I and I determined that this is probably that type 2 error. Like, you're probably overthinking this, you're probably applying something that isn't actually happening here. It's like, if a black person gets pulled over and gets a speeding ticket, they're going to be like, oh, well, it's because I'm black. And it's like, well, I mean, like, if he put a gun to your head or something, I might think so, but like, this was a routine traffic stop, I don't know.
Yeah,
And
and cops don't just pull somebody over. Usually, they don't even know what you look like. They just see the car.
yeah,
So,
but I mean, like, there was that cop that just like walked up to a fence, and he was like, I think they're cap guns. But then he like announces himself for like 2 seconds and then shoots some like 12-year-old kid through a fence. Like, they couldn't
wow,
even see him. Like, yeah, he's
that's
probably right.
bad. That's bad. But the thing is, it isn't the norm. That
No,
is
no,
a awful situation that definitely deserves a lot of scrutiny.
yeah,
But then it does harm, I think, in general to society, to all sides, if you just make assumptions about that entire group.
yeah,
And actually, I want to think like the whole, like, excuse me, I'm feeling very coffee. It must be the
Vape lung.
coronavirus. It's
Oh,
hitting me.
corona. Yeah.
Yeah.
The corona vape lung virus.
Yeah. But there's this kind of I guess interpretation that a lot of people seem to have, and I don't want to have that. I'm not going to say that everybody is like this, but it seems to be common that people kind of look at, well, I guess a small subsect of a group cannot be representative of the whole. And yet a lot of people seem to gravitate towards that and want to like balloon up some small but significant proportion of a group and make it representative of the entire group for some reason. And
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at, is like, when you use certain terminology, like very generalized stuff, uh, it does create a confusion with people. Like, you may not actually mean it's all of those people, but it's sounding that way when there's like other ways it could be phrased to like actually make the point you want to make, and not have it like be so distracting from your point, like that you have just made this, like, yeah, like first impression, people are coming into the rest of what you're going to say thinking that you just got it out for all blank.
Yeah.
And it's like, to some degree, a lot of people that feel that miss the nuance. It's like, the way the English language works is we tend to just leave things off. Like when we're talking in a conversation in context, and I'm like, if we were having this conversation and I was like, cops really need to step up their game, well, I just said cops, right?
Yeah.
It makes it sound like it's all cops, right? But because of the context, already what we're talking about, what I'm referring to. Without
Yeah,
that,
yeah. The cops who do those things
yeah,
are the subject of the conversation. Not all cops. It's just
right,
that
right,
particular proportion of them.
yeah. So, and to some degree, it can get a little wordy to be like, bad cops and good cops that just sit by and watch really need to step up their game. Like that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So I understand that aspect of it, but there's this. I mean, like, both sides of the coin really need to look at nuance a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. And you brought up the idea of just a second ago, talking about like labels and stuff. And that I think is also a problem too. Like taking just a few categories and putting everybody into those boxes ignores the humanity of those people. Like, we're fucking humans, man. There's a lot more going on than the political party that I follow, or my job, or the pigmentation of my skin, or the country of origin, or something. Like, we are a lot more than all that. And to put people in a box like that, actually, it pisses me off,
Yeah,
you know? And I
yeah,
think that actually is a core facet of that issue.
yeah. Now, if that box has some feature to it that could feasibly lead to the problem you're alluding to, like, I can understand that a little more. Like when people say cops need to step up their game or whatever, it's because, like what I was saying earlier, that police privilege gives them power, which is very corrupting. Like, power, it's very easy to misuse.
That's
And
true. Yeah. And
like when you're given that extra responsibility, or that, those extra privileges or whatever, you automatically have, like, you know you have to work a little harder at presenting yourself well.
Sure. And like with the position of being a police officer, um, that job has certain features that don't exist in other jobs, and I think that's a legit category. I mean, it's a top-down kind of thing. Okay,
Yeah,
what's your job? I'm a police officer. But that doesn't say anything about what you like to do in your spare time, what your personality is like, what your home life is like. It doesn't say anything about how strong you are or how heavy or tall you are. It says
yeah,
none of those things.
yeah,
And it's like there are categories from a top-down perspective that makes sense. It's like if somebody's like, "Hey, what was that person? Describe that person to me." You could say, "Oh, they were a redhead. They had like a green shirt or something like that." These are insignificant and useless features. They just describe the person physically. Um, but you can't go, you can't take a top-down description and apply it from a bottom up standpoint and say like, well, all redheads are this way,
right.
because having red hair says nothing about your upbringing, your socioeconomic status, your experiences. it, where
Same,
you live. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
same way with whether you're cis or trans, same way
yeah,
with sexual orientation. None of that has anything, like at least hardly anything to
yeah.
do, you know,
Only as far as those categories dictate.
right.
If you're talking a redhead, you can only speak to the color of their hair. If you're talking somebody who's black, you can only speak to the color of the pigmentation of their skin. It says nothing about anything else.
Yeah,
And that's the problem I have with this is like people make generalizations based on these categories, um, the top down categories, and assume that like all of them are the same.
right.
All
You're,
cops are all the same. All men are all the same. All Republicans or Democrats or socialists or something. Like everybody wants the same thing. Everybody is the same, and we're
yeah,
not.
you're placing this assumption, like this is the biggest problem I have with the word privilege being misused, is that you are automatically placing this assumption on everyone who shares that characteristic, that it is impossible for them to have been raised correctly by decent parents that taught them that, they're not any better than anyone else, and that they need to treat people fairly and all that stuff. Like you are I mean, you're being a bigot. There's really no better way to put it.
Yeah. Essentially, it's assuming that some superficial feature uh, dictates the whole of your person, and that is completely wrong in my book. Like yeah, when I look at people, I see the differences between them, but I assume nothing about their personality until I get to know them and have a conversation.
Yeah, and I
Because
mean,
what we're all about on Kitchen Sink Microscopy is talking to people.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, like this is probably too much of a tangent to go off on, but I mean, there's cultural nuances too. It's like, we're not raised in, China 50 years ago or whatever, where like, you could only have one kid or something. I think now it's two, but like things were very restrictive, things were very patriarchal. It's like, sure, there might be a patriarchal bent going on in America, but it is in no way like built in to our core values, like as men, to think that we're better. Like it's not some systemic conspiracy against women.
no,
you know,
not at all.
we
Yeah,
don't put like robes on and sacrifice goats at night and like get together and talk about how we're going to like be terrible people to women, like
yeah. It's the whole mustache twirling, villain kind of thing. Like that. That isn't how it works.
yeah,
And now, some are there some sort of cultural influences present? Yeah, but there are many cultural, like if you're talking the United States, if you talk about like a tiny little teeny tiny country, then there's probably fewer influences in that regard. But a place as big as the US, hell, like a lot of our states are bigger than most European countries. This is a big place with a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas, and we don't all think alike.
Mhm.
Who, whatever category you want to put people in, um, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, like you touched on this earlier, but there's like better factors to look at to determine whether or not somebody might have like a privilege that they're going to abuse. Like you can get privilege from a socioeconomic status. You can't
Mm-hmm.
get one from your gender, you know.
Exactly. Like, and maybe, okay, maybe in like a couple situations that might apply, but it's so few, it's really not worth even talking about.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, your socioeconomic status, at least in the US, is everything
Yep.
as far as privilege goes. How much money you have, like your where you live, your upbringing, your education, that kind of thing, your
Yeah.
family. Um, that's that does matter.
And
But it has
like,
nothing to do with what you look like. I mean, you could
yeah.
look like anything. You could look like uh, you could be like some kind of hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that. If you have billions of dollars, you're on par with everybody else that has billions of dollars.
And the sad thing is everyone recognizes that. They're just not applying it. Like
Yeah.
anytime, a celebrity gets off the hook with, like doing something really bad, everyone's like,
Epstein. Oh wait, no, he was murdered. Oh, sorry, committed suicide.
but yeah, like anytime that happens, there's outrage at how they just use their money to get off scot-free. Like
Mhm.
they grease the right pawns to, like get that job or whatever. And uh, but then that factor somehow disappears when they throw gender or race into it. It's like, oh, that promotion just happened because he's a white dude, instead of like maybe he is like kind of cronies with the CEO, or like there's so many other things under the surface that could be going on,
Yeah, exactly. And
or
even
he could be
things,
better at the job, like there's also
sure.
like the innocuous explanation is always
And
a viable thing too.
and a lot of times it's just drive or ambition, your personal behavior. Like, people get ahead in careers because they try to get ahead. So if you don't try and you just say, "Oh, it's because of factor X," um, well, no, it's not. It's because you didn't actually try. Um, yeah. So the whole point here is that there's so much more going on underneath that influences how things work, and I think it, saying that it's because you exist in some arbitrary box, uh, or don't exist in that box, is it's actually I would I would say it's probably harmful to everybody, because then people don't even try. They're like, well, you know what? I'm black, or I'm poor, or I'm Mexican, or I'm gay, or something like that. So the world's out to get me, and why should I even try, or something like that.
Yeah, there is kind of like an unintended uh, drawback to this social justice warrior movement, in that it's almost like weakening the people that they're trying so hard to defend.
Hmm.
Like, it's like reinforcing the idea that they need protection um, in situations that they may not actually. Like, I'm not saying that they don't sometimes need someone to stand up for them, but
Well, I think everybody does,
at
depending
some
on the
point, yeah.
circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly gone through some tough
Yeah.
shit in my time, and like being a guy didn't help me get through it at all. Being white didn't help me get through it. Like beating cancer had nothing to do with being white.
No, no, exactly.
Like there's just so many things that um there's this is too much to point to blanket statement one thing, just
Yeah. And that's kind of kind of where I come from, is like I try. I obviously you've got your brain kind of fighting you, those whole instinctual sorts of things. But I try to look at people as individuals. Like, you are a unique person with unique experiences. Maybe we have some shared experiences, maybe we don't. But those experiences are what makes us who we are. And I think judging people based on something other than that, like based on these kinds of superficial features, is, well, it's prejudice, in a
Yeah.
nutshell.
Yeah. Textbook definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, we're gonna piss so many people off with this episode.
But I would hope that there's a conversation, because I think this is a bigger thing that we could probably cover in this time.
Yeah.
Honestly, like this is, I mean, hell, we're talking about what does it mean to be human. You know, that's a
Yeah.
it's a huge topic.
Actually, I was having a conversation yesterday, and speaking of the human thing, I I started thinking about this whole concept of like, alienating people, whether or not they're actually being assholes, pushing them away, or punching Nazis or whatever is really just going to drive people into the darkness rather than letting them see the light and come around. And
Yeah.
and I was thinking, like, when we throw out labels like um, white supremacist or racist, there's so much negative connotation in that. And I'm not saying it's not deserved, but if I'm just starting to think like my rationale came from that uh, these are all learned behaviors. These you're raised in a certain environment, and I think that's kind of what we were getting to. Is a lot of this, it comes down to experience in your life, in every individual's life.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of examples of people breaking those cycles of learned behavior, like physical abuse and drug and alcohol abuse. Like some of that stuff.
Racism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But instead of calling it racism, why not just call it human abuse?
Yeah.
Like, because then you're seeing it as something that was done to you, not like your parent was racist to you, but your parent was giving you this disease.
Oh,
You know,
that's a, ooh, wow, that's a super interesting point, because people will look at somebody who's like racist or whatever, and they'll instantly judge them as a human being, and they may hate that person. They might
yeah,
even do something violent to that person. But it's like, but why? That
yeah,
person thinks that way because their experience led them there,
yeah.
not
It's
because
not.
they're an inherently evil person. That's just all they know.
Yeah,
So
it's
why
not.
not try to like engage that person
Yeah.
and have a conversation and bring them back? Okay, we're going back into Daryl Davis. Um,
Well, yeah. I mean,
Example, yeah,
it's not their fault how they were raised. You
yeah,
know, and so if a person's parents gave them this environment where they thought they were better than some other race for no particular reason, it's just how they were raised, that person has an illness, that person needs help.
yeah.
And when you need help, whether you know it or not, if people just start shunning you, that's not helping you get over what you need to get over.
No, no. Imagine if you came to the doctor and they said you had cancer, and then everybody just turned their back on you, and they're like, "Well, this is, you just suck."
Yeah,
No, they want to help you. They try to solve the issue. And I would say, in the case of like racism or some kind of bigotry or whatever, some bias, all you have to do is engage somebody and try to enlighten them. Like, give them more experiences. If you've had nothing but negative experiences, well, maybe a few positive ones will help to turn the tables. a little bit. And you're not going to have that if everybody just shuts you down and yells at you and punches you in the face. Like, yeah, okay, punch a Nazi. Okay, you solved anything, dickhead? I doubt it. You know, like the way to change a Nazi, if there really is any, is to have a conversation and try to change their mind. Would you rather have an eternal foe or an ally in the future?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, it's a it's a reasonable question.
all of these interactions that we're talking about, um, they seem so much like good guy, bad guy, black and white. It's really bigot versus bigot.
That's a good. Yep, that's true.
You know,
Yeah.
like there's people that are so hell bent on looking like the good guy that somebody comes along with, talking about solutions like this, like, and they start attacking us for not being their kind of good guy, like, oh my god. So now you're attacking like allies and your enemy or whatever. It's like, but why see them as enemies? Why not see them as just people who need help, humans who need help? We're all humans.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so
And
exasperating to remind people of the fact that we're all human.
sure, and maybe help is a little extreme, or saying somebody has a disease might be a bit extreme in some situations, but seeing things differently. I mean, this is, we're pretty far into this episode to start going into like the perception is reality kind of thing, but it really is like what the way you see the world is the sum total of your experiences, and it kind of dictates how you interpret the things that you observe. And so yeah, if you have experiences in your life that say all X are bad, all cops are evil, all black people are whatever, something like that, all men are this or all women are that, and then somebody comes and they just start yelling at you and they push you away, how is that solving the problem? How is that making that person understand something?
Right.
It's the whole like equal and opposite reaction kind of thing. Like if you push against somebody, they're going to push back with probably actually more force.
Yeah.
So I think that the best way to involve or to bring people closer to the truth is to have a conversation, engage them, um, and try to understand. Maybe, and here's the thing: in all of this, everybody needs to understand you could be wrong. You might not be right. Maybe the position that you have is actually wrong, and the person that you hate is actually right. And that's an important thing to understand. I mean, that's what brought me to atheism. Actually, is that kind of uh, outlook, I guess.
hmm And
And
it's also possible that both of you are wrong.
or
You know?
right, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. Like that this whole like false dichotomy. Like somehow we must be at war. If we're not arguing or fighting, then something's wrong. Why? Why can't we just all get along? Like
Yeah.
even if we see things differently, why can't we just get along and be civil to each other?
Yeah.
You know?
It's like take the problem you have, and instead of complaining about it, like do something positive about it, or
Yeah.
like related to it, or try to affect change in any small way that you can, like without just complaining. Like, I don't know, like I joined this law enforcement oversight committee thing.
Good.
Like I haven't like I've actively participated in it yet, but like having donated some money to it, and just having it, like, just knowing that that exists actually kind of makes me feel better. Like it makes
Hmm.
me feel like at least something is being done for the things I'm concerned about, and that
Yeah.
assuages some of the negativity that I was feeling. So it's like if people were just made to be aware of ways that they can redirect their emotion. I think,
Ooh, philosophical Aikido.
yeah,
And that brings us again back to Daryl Davis. Like, he is a black man who went and befriended a bunch of KKK members and changed their minds. Like, he didn't get violent or start yelling and arguing and
yeah,
burning stuff and throwing fire bombs and stuff. No, he sat down and had civil conversations with them and showed them that he is a human being and he understood the humanity of them, and he brought them around. Like, they saw things differently, and maybe he did too, and that's a good thing.
well, yeah, he definitely did too, because I watched some of those videos, and yeah, he changed some minds, but he didn't change them like a complete 180. Because
No.
I watched one KKK guy walk up, throw his arm around Daryl Davis, and say to the camera operator, like, this N word's a great guy. So it's like
Yeah.
he's still he's still got a little bit of the, like, but Daryl Davis didn't even seem like, he didn't flinch or anything. He wasn't bothered by that. He was like, you know what, I I I managed to change his mind on the important stuff. Like, words don't mean nearly as much as actively trying to oppress who I am as a human being.
Yeah,
Like,
like what you feel inside, and that kind of thing. And I
yeah,
think it's important too for people to understand that the state of a human mind is not a constant. It's a state of it's variables, a lot of variables. It's ever in a state of evolution. We're always changing, always learning. I to assume that you're like one thing or the other, or you fit in this box or that box, like that's bullshit. That's bollocks. Like, whatever you believe, you've completely lost if you see things that way. And I don't care how many people I piss off by saying that, because it's totally true. Um, you have to understand that things take time. If you want to change somebody's mind, I know this is the Facebook, Instagram generation, and people want things now, but that's not how the world works. That's not how people work. It takes time. You have to actually be real and sit down, have a conversation, do some actual work, and take care of one person at a time. If you want to change the world, that's fine, but don't start at the biggest picture. Don't say, I'm going to change the whole country. No, pick your neighbor or a friend or somebody, people have a conversation, try to change their minds, and listen to their ideas and stuff. Like, it takes time.
yeah.
Yeah.
I try really hard not to ignore or block or unfriend people that I have disagreements with, because I need that challenge to be there. I need that diversity to be there, and there's always a chance that one of us will come around to the other side, or find some common ground at the very least. So it's hard
Oh,
though.
yeah. Yeah, it totally is, depending on what it is. If you're talking about whether Star Trek or Star Wars is better, it might be a little easier to handle than something like racist or something, or
Yeah,
the flat earth conversation or something. But it's worth it, um because you're not going to change the world by forcing people or shunning them. That's not going to change shit. You've just basically thrown in the towel if you resort to those tactics, or ad hominem, or any of the other kind of stuff like that. No, you got to, like, converse with people and talk, and realize that sometimes you fail. Not everybody is going to see eye to eye with you, and you just have to accept that and move on. But and my personal philosophy is, like, if I die knowing I've changed two people's minds, enlightened them in some way, made them think about things differently, like, my life is worthwhile.
yeah.
Yeah.
If one life has improved two, that's a net positive.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hoping I can instill in them the same sort of drive that I have to engage with people and have conversations, and hopefully they'll spread the word. and get people to think about things. Not, and this is the thing, I don't want people to think like me. I want people to think critically, like question things, wonder about things, explore and learn and have conversations. Don't just preclude that whatever you think is correct and go from there. No, start off with the assumption that you probably don't know half of what you think you know, and having a conversation with different minded people will bring you that much closer to the truth. Yeah. Oh, wow, that was deep.
Yeah. This whole conversation got pretty deep, actually.
Yeah, it did. No, this is a great conversation. Holy shit! Wow.
Yeah, it went into some pretty interesting territory, you know. But
Hmm.
I do think it all coalesced pretty well, because I think we really got into the root of where all of these generalizations are coming from,
Yeah.
and maybe some better ways of handling it, maybe not. But,
I would hope, and if people have better ideas or new ideas or something, I would definitely love to hear them. I think the important thing is to not generalize, to assume. I mean, again, it's those broad categories are there for descriptive purposes and just kind of lumping people for everyday purposes, but not to force them into a pigeonhole.
yeah.
Um, that probably didn't make as much sense as I was hoping it would.
No,
Um,
no, I get it. It's like you have to recognize that these characteristics do differ from person to person, and some of those characteristics are shared among groups and all that stuff. Like there are legitimate reasons for grouping, but you got to understand which situations those are and which aren't. Okay.
yeah, and it goes back to like the top down versus bottom up kind of thing. I think first and foremost, people are individuals, they're humans, they're unique with unique experiences, and some of them share certain characteristics, whatever those may be. And again, those characteristics are arbitrary, and we make them up. Like nature doesn't have Democrats. That's something that humans made up.
Yeah.
Uh, and in fact, most animals can't even see color, so redheads don't even exist. So, and depending on what spectrum you see in, do you see in UV or ultraviolet or uh, infrared or something like that? You're going to see things differently. Have
Yeah.
you have you ever looked at infrared video or photography?
Like of flowers, like what
Yeah,
bird?
or
Yeah.
people, or people. People
Yeah.
actually look very much the same in IR.
Huh.
Um, yeah.
Interesting.
So, just an interesting thought that, like, our perspective is very sensual based, not sex, but our senses kind of, the limitations of our senses dictate these kinds of categories. And I think they're kind of bogus, honestly.
Yeah.
Eh, Yeah.
Oh man.
So,
Well,
yeah, that's a good point to end it on, actually. Yeah, we're like over an hour in. So, yeah.
yeah. So I really hope that we get some comments under this video, because this is probably firing you all up, and we would love it if you would keep the conversation going, because conversation's fun, and it can be I don't know, you can achieve great things with it.
Yeah, it can be definitely be very constructive. It can be destructive, but it should be constructive. And yeah, have conversations, and everybody try to be civil to each other, because after all, we all bleed red.
And we're all deep sink diving.
All right, have a good night.